Welcome back, guys, to Outside the Octagon podcast, or OTO. And you may know this if you're a fan of either of our channels, but we're bringing it back after a few year-long wait. So this is my co-host, Bannon Crowley from Next Man Up, and he can introduce himself.
Hello. If you guys are back, if you guys are fans of the channel and you watched this about a year and a half ago, we're back now. Hopefully, we'll be uploading this on the Lucky Punch Sports page. So maybe I'll get some links in the bio if I'm lucky. We'll see what happens. But we're very excited to come back after this layoff. And I think with the layoff now, we're even better, and we know we know more what we're talking about this time. So I'm very excited to be back.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And we did have a lot of bad takes back then, so this will be a better experience. We're better at what we do, better at the game. And so you can look for new releases after UFC pay-per-views, even after big UFC events or news. Pretty much just look on the channel and you will be able to find it and watch through older episodes as we get through them. And we're going to be going through future fights, pay-per-views, fight nights, all of the above, any UFC news you want to see. And you can go through both of our channels, give us notes, feedback, comments, and we'll respond to you guys. We love talking with you guys and making this a collaborative podcast. So we'll start off. As you guys know, UFC 308 just happened. Ilya Topuria defended his belt against Max Holloway, cracking him for the first time. So I'll bring this back to Banning for the recap of the event.
Yeah. Also, before we start that, like you said, if you guys want to see anything, make sure to leave it down below. As long as it's a good comment. If it's a bad one, I'm just gonna delete it. And probably ban you from the channel. So,
Yep.
just kidding, obviously. We'll have some good discourse, and also too, for this podcast, because both of us do make prediction videos as well. So we decided to do this after the fact because now we can talk about it, because I think we both obviously plan on continuing to make our prediction videos on our channel. So this is kind of a little different. We can kind of decompress. Some of those prediction videos can be kind of compressed 10 minutes. There's more to talk about after the fight. So now we have an outlet to do that. And starting off with the main card, we'll go through all the winners. Starting off with Shara Bullet. I believe both of us picked him in this fight. No, you didn't? So
Nope.
this will be something that you guys will notice that we'll talk about for a lot of these cards. We do have pretty similar picks most of the times, but on the main card, we usually always have at least two or three different winners. And right now I'm on a good streak, but from this fight, we saw a lot from Shara. Going in, I thought that Armin wasn't really too good. I know some people thought that he would be able to go out there and get the win, and it was an interesting fight. Shara obviously had a very creative knockout after that. I do think that he will get fraud checked. He has shown that he's not the most complete or amazing fighter, but obviously we got to give him some credit for this one, going and getting that spinning double back fist knockout. So with him only being 30 years old, still undefeated, obviously this is a big win for him. I would say he's probably in that top 25 right now. So I think another fight could get him ranked. So what do you think? Who should he go up against next? How do you feel he fought?
Yeah, so I'll start with the fight and through his past fights. I've watched all of his UFC fights in its entirety and in replay, and he's, as you said, he's very one-sided. Is not well-rounded at all. He started off kickboxing and then transitioned to Muay Thai, where he's very good at Muay Thai. When you watch him fight, he has like explosive snapping kicks. He likes to stay outside range and just unload on you, treat you like a punching bag, and that's what he's done to everybody so far, but I've been waiting for him to get fraud checked. Petrosyan has a Muay Thai background. He's just not very good in any aspect in the UFC. He might be good before that or regional, but Shara obviously showed that he's a legit prospect. His Muay Thai is incredible. He had the double spinning back fist KO, which is pretty crazy. Earned him a bonus from Dana White, but in the past against guys like Oleg Jakic, who are more well-rounded fighters, he showed no desire to defend takedowns for defense at all, and especially only having one eye, Michael Bisping style. It's going to be important to defend yourself, especially your head. If that eye swells up, he won't be able to see anything, which is pretty hard to fight blind. So I think he needs to kind of tone down that ego he has. It's a good thing in the UFC to have a character. You can be Shara Bullet, the pirate, the one-eyed ginger, Dagestani. It's a great thing to build fans and money, which is what you need in the UFC. But I really think he needs to focus on being a more well-rounded fighter to be a legit ranked fighter at 185.
Yeah, so who would you want to see him go up against next? I think, like I said before, he kind of is in that top 25-ish, so I think he could be looking at a ranked fight after this. And there's it's pretty open, honestly, if we're looking at it right now. Chris Curtis is fighting in January. Ikram is also fighting in February. But besides that, pretty much almost everyone above him is open at this point. So who would you like to see him go against?
Yeah, at 185, I think someone like Jack Hermanson, who he hasn't fought in over a year. He fights almost once a year, and he's a guy that Dana kind of they throw in against, or even McMahon, they throw in against guys like prospects like Joe Pyfer, where it's kind of like a gatekeeper test at the bottom of the rankings to see if you're legit. And Hermanson's a good fighter to test if you are legit. He's a stockier, well built guy that Shar will be. He's a way better striker than for sure. But it's a real test of character for Shar to see if he wants to really defend and move himself up to the rankings. Because Hermanson is still 11th ranked, so it's a great leg up for Shar to join the rankings at middleweight.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as well. I think another guy that could be in there, maybe Mikel Pereira, coming off of that loss against Fluffy Hernandez, and he's still kind of hanging on to the rankings right now. Obviously, we're recording this right before the rankings come out tomorrow, but I think we're not going to see that much of a change with these guys towards the bottom since none of them fought this weekend. But I think we could see a good ranked fight up for next up for Shara Bullet. Next up, we had Lerone Murphy going in there. Even though he lost that first round, he came out and almost dominated those next two rounds. It was looking like a very good fight to start off, and Dan Ige's aura unfortunately couldn't give him the win. But Lerone Murphy does keep that perfect record as well. And one thing I want to talk about before I bounce it over to you is he did call someone out after the fight, and I think this would be a good fight to see. So this is who I'm going to say he should fight next in Josh Emmett. I think that'd be a great fight to see, and also have a chance for him to move up into the top 10 as well.
Yeah, I like that Emmett call out a lot for Murphy. It's showing he's not hiding, he's not backing down. Another huge power puncher in the division, and he just passed the test of the first one, Dan Ige. And I feel really bad for 50K Ige because after 303 stepping up against Lopez, people thought Dana was going to reward him with kind of an easier, more fun matchup for him. And it was a fun matchup, but Murphy's known for being such a skilled, lengthy, athletic fighter where Ige is more of just a straight up wrestler and a huge power puncher, similar to Emmett, really. So it's a good call out from Murphy where he can keep practicing these same things in his camp. But Ige was a tough matchup. I had Murphy by decision. I just thought being outside of range, being the lengthier, more athletic guy, he can avoid the wrestling. And he did get dropped early. So he should be ready for that. He said he knew he was going to get dropped. And against someone like Emmett, if you get dropped, you might not be able to get back up. So I like the call out. Murphy's one of the brightest UK prospects in MMA. 145 is pretty open at the bottom. Obviously, the top now with guys like Ilya winning is very it's kind of stuck at the moment because Ilya is that good. But the bottom has a ton of dead weight. And Emmett's a great call out for Murphy to finally join and move from being an undefeated prospect to a legit contender in the division.
Yeah, and we haven't seen Emmett fight since he knocked out Bryce Mitchell last year as well. So it'll be almost a year since we saw that fight. Obviously, this would be a great fight, get him into the top 10 as well to see if he really is that contender that we think he could be. So next up, we had another fight, basically a number one contender fight, even though one of the guys in there was already a number one contender and should have already had a championship fight by now. But now officially, after this fight, Magomed Ankalaev went out there and he got it done in an interesting fight, I would say. I was expecting there to be a knockout. I thought he was going to be able to knock out Rakic, but I know Rakic pretty tough. They went out there. Not the most exciting fight, but Ankalaev kind of showed his different skills that he has. And I think it just wasn't as exciting, obviously, because no one got knocked out. And with Pereira as the champion, we're very used to having those very big highlight moment knockouts. But Magomed Ankalaev proved that he is probably the hardest challenge for Alex Pereira at this weight right now. And I think going into that fight in the future next year, he is going to give him the toughest challenge that we've seen so far.
Yeah, after Pereira's first fight at 205, it was Jan Blachowicz, which is the only kind of well-rounded light heavyweight that people assumed would test his wrestling. And Pereira really did fine, split decision. Some thought he lost at the time. But Blachowicz is another guy that's called out Pereira, but he's got to win a fight first. He fights once a year also. And Ankalaev is that guy that's been calling out Alex and ringing at his door for several months now, and he's the guy that almost every fan wants to see to test Alex. And whether you like him or not, he's a fan favorite. Alex has been, I wouldn't say the word cherry picked, but he's picked his opponents wisely. He's very active, so he can do that. But they all are strikers who wanted to strike with him. Guys like Rakic or Ankalaev knew they said they're not going to do that. Ankalaev is a great striker with a sambo background, so he's going to be great on the ground. And I think a lot of people forget that Pereira trains with Glover Teixeira. He's with very talented grapplers all the time. He's been in the UFC for 4 years now, or 3 years now, excuse me. So he will be ready for it. People act like he's still a kickboxer. He's had 3 years to train for this. I think you give him Ankalaev. I think he should stay at light heavyweight. If he wants to fight DDP, he can do that after. If people think he wants to fight Jones or Aspinall, I'd rather see him clean through light heavyweight fully, leave no questions unanswered. And then I think he can make quick work of Ankalaev. I think they're probably going to strike. He'll knock him out just like he did with Roundtree or Jamal Hill or Geary. So I think Ankalaev's obviously next up, but Dana said he needed an exciting fight. He promised an exciting fight. Wasn't that exciting. Rakic was backing out of most exchanges, but Ankalaev, he looked all right. Decision win, but I think it's the fight you need to make at light heavyweight for Pereira.
Yeah, and like you said, this is the next fight. After that, it does get a little more interesting. I think the fight against DDP obviously would be a good one, but I mean, we'll talk about middleweight after this. There's so many guys that are up in that contendership right now. Light heavyweight, pretty different in my opinion. After Ankalaev, I think the only one that has a good case to have a championship fight next would be Jan Blachowicz. Obviously, we saw Jamal Hill kind of he was falling asleep or did some emote after that Pereira fight that we saw against Roundtree, like he wasn't knocked out in the first round. So I don't think he really deserves a title fight next. I think he should fight Roundtree again, and I think Roundtree would probably. I hope he knocks out Jamal Hill. That would be a big hope on my wish list for next year. But yeah, I mean, Ankalaev is next. After that, I think Blachowicz could be the next in line. I think a 5-round fight between them would be very interesting because if we ever see Pereira go 5 rounds, I mean, we saw him go 3 rounds against him, so who knows at that point. But yeah, Ankalaev, like you said, maybe not his best fight ever, but he went out there and he got it done. But the next fight, as we know, one of the performances of the night, which we got 2 of them in the final 2 fights. Both of these lived up to the hype, in my opinion, even though this one ended pretty quickly. It was probably, I've seen people saying this might be one of the best wins in UFC history. And when we're talking about dominance, I mean, this is insane. Looking at the pictures after too, a lot of people were doubting Khamzat Chimaev going into this. They were saying that he lost all of his killer ability because people saw him being nice and, you know, he wasn't that same guy that was smashing people before. But that quickly changed when we saw him go for that takedown and just destroy Robert Whittaker in one of the most impressive wins that we've seen in a long time. And that'll beg the question too. We can talk about this after we recap this fight on what's next for him, but an absolutely dominating win. And it looked like you had some contender or champion going up against some unranked guy, which is so insane about this because he just dominated the 3rd best, or I guess 4th best middleweight in the world right now.
Yeah, and Whittaker looked like he was primed and ready for this fight. He's been training very hard, definitely grappling and wrestling for it. but Chimaev is a one-of-one talent in the UFC. There's no doubt about that anymore. That hype he and Pereira had when both of them signed, they were both the most hyped prospects in 21 and 2020. And now they're both finally, or Pereira has, but Chimaev's now living up to his end of the deal. And he's a very unique talent where he doesn't care. He really doesn't care. If you want to strike with him, he's still going to take you down. He's one of the only guys, I would only say Khabib, where they really focused on low level takedowns. He can shoot from outside range. He like you can try and strike with him. He's still going to get to both your legs. He shoots for these low, long takedowns, gets you against the fence. Eventually, he does with everybody, even great wrestlers like Usman. Gets you against the fence and then just pressures you through the rest of the 5 minutes because he gets his first takedown successfully in the first minute of every round. He doesn't take any strikes. Only, I believe, Gilbert Burns landed more than 3 strikes against him, which is absurd. And he's just so talented. He knows what he wants to do every fight. And people were thinking, yeah, he's not that same guy. He's more humble. But after his illnesses, pulling out, missing weight, personal issues with his family, he might just be a more humble and smarter fighter, which will only benefit his stock in the UFC. So I'm excited for Chimaev, and I'd like to ask you, a self-proclaimed Duplessis DDP fan, if you think Chimaev deserves this title shot over Strickland in the rematch right now.
Yeah, I think we're both going to have a pretty similar answer. I think we can dive a little bit into this. I know we've had some conversations about this as well, and this is my number one MMA theory about the casual Sean Strickland fan, about how we've both seen this actually firsthand, where we were talking about DDP and Sean Strickland fighting again. And, we were talking to someone who was a little bit more of a casual watcher, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that. But then telling us both that Sean Strickland, obviously the more entertaining fighter than DDP because he finishes, and DDP is not exciting, even though we've seen him get a finish in most of his fights up to this point. And I mean, we just saw Khamzat destroy the number 3 ranked guy in the division, and we saw Sean Strickland go 5 rounds with Paulo Costa, who I don't think is very good anymore. So I think, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious if I'm going to pick between Sean Strickland and Khamzat next. Money-wise, for the UFC, I think both of them are very big, but I think people forget how massive Khamzat Chimaev is outside of just the US. Like, he is one of the biggest stars in the UFC. And just because he isn't in the US, even though he still is obviously very big, but he's massive outside of the US. I know there's a lot of people that are Sean Strickland fans, but I think they all kind of turned off of him after that DDP fight. Most people just became fans because he was based and said a lot of things that were like interesting and maybe funny, I guess. But like, if I'm DDP, I think Sean Strickland's the easier fight because Khamzat can finish you. So I think it should be Khamzat next. It's going to be a more entertaining fight. The build-up's going to be better. And I don't think Sean Strickland will be happy about it. But if we're taking both of these guys' last fights, one went 5 rounds with Paulo Costa in 2024, and one just completely ran through Robert Whittaker in a few minutes.
Yeah, and if you look at Strickland on paper or in 5 second or 10-second social media clips of the last 10 seconds of every fight, he looks like the most electric American fighter in the UFC. People love him, but when you really dissect that, the Adesanya win was great. The DDP fight, the Costa fight, he really just spars. Same thing he does. He fights harder in his gym wars than he does in the Octagon, fighting for that belt. He is a split decision merchant almost every single fight. Either the fans say he got robbed in a split decision or he won barely a split decision based on damage. It doesn't really make sense to defend it. People get mad at grapplers who do no damage and just stall for control time. Sean is just doing the sparring version of that by standing up, backing up, and then the last 5 seconds he gets a TikTok clip of going all out, which wins him the rounds in some judges' eyes. So I completely agree. You have to award Chimaev for a dominant win like that. If Strickland was out here finishing Paulo Costa in a first round KO, if he was doing stuff like that, I could see a case for a rematch. But we can't forget that he already fought DDP for that belt back, and It was 5 rounds of sparring. I mean, DDP is a fun fighter. You see it in every fight against Izzy. When you have two fun fighters, it makes an awesome matchup, especially for the belt. But Strickland kind of makes people fight him the way he does from that backing up. He makes people look boring. And if you want to say Strickland DDP is the next fight, I think you're allowed to say that, but we're going to see the same thing. One of them will win a split decision, and then Chimaev will come anyway. So I think, why wait? Let's get Chimaev now, and then let Strickland prove that he's worth it to fight for his belt back. See if he can actually make a exciting fight, and then you give them Chimaev or DDP, the winner of that. So I think we should reward the exciting fights first. At the end of the day, UFC, it's for entertainment. It's for great fights. I think you have to reward that.
Yeah, and also another thing too, Strickland says that he doesn't want to fight outside of the US. And with the amount of places that the UFC is trying to go right now, especially if they want to get that UFC Africa fight or pretty much anywhere outside of America, Sean Strickland's getting upset that he's has to go fight in these places, which also I guess people are a big fan of because he's based, obviously, once again. But like you said, a split decision merchant. And another thing that I'm sure we'll also get into this as we talk about a lot of these fights, especially within the future. Both of us agree on this as well. Like you said, bringing up that DDP Strickland fight where people said that Strickland got robbed. You can't have a close decision and get robbed. I talked about this the other day as well on one of my videos talking about DDP as well. That those don't intersect. They're parallel lines. You can't have a close fight and get robbed, because if you get robbed, you could say Dominic Reyes got robbed, obviously winning 3 rounds, but you can't say that a fight that went to decision and was that close with a DDP and Strickland fight, you can't get robbed when it's a close decision. It doesn't equal the same thing. When you get robbed, you clearly didn't win the fight, but they say that you won the fight. So just another interesting thing that we'll talk about probably as we continue this podcast, because I'm sure we're going to get some of those fights as well, where there were definitely some robberies, which I would say there was one on the main card as well. The first, where the card that we saw last weekend in the prelims with Renat against Carlos Leal. They gave Renat, someone gave him 3 rounds, and this was the first fight in the night. And I had Renat winning, but there's no way that he won 3 rounds. I thought that he lost the fight and maybe lost all 3 rounds, but they gave him the win. But that would be an example of a robbery for Leal, who did look very good. I'm interested in his future. But moving it back onto the main event, Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. Going into this fight, I'll shout out my channel once again if you guys want to go down there and look at the predictions. I did tell you guys that Ilia was going to win by 3rd round KO, so I'll just put that out there as well. But this fight went exactly how I expected it to. I think the problem with Ilia, like I said in that video as well, him and DDP are in a very similar lane. They're fighting against these fan favorites, and people discredit how good they are because they want to see them win. I mean, it's almost the same exact thing at this point. DDP going up against Sean Strickland and Izzy, both very big fan favorite guys, so people are going to hate on DDP and say he's not that good. And same thing with Ilia going against Volk and Max Holloway, probably 2 of the biggest fan favorites in the UFC. But what we just saw from him, he is entering what could be one of the best primes that we've seen in the UFC's history. I mean, featherweight, we get a lot of good fighters coming through, but what he just did to Max Holloway, which no one has ever done before. And the interesting part about that is Volkanovski obviously has the ability to finish people. He's fought Max 3 times and he wasn't able to knock him out. So it is getting interesting. We'll talk about the Volk rematch next, but I just want to hear your thoughts about this fight as well.
Yeah, I mean, starting off with the featherweight division, that the 2 wins Ilya has, I would even, or I'll ask this to you after I'm done with my points, but a case for fighter of the year, Pereira has the most fights in the year, the most wins in the year, I'll say. Ilya only has this in the Volk win, but in my opinion, he's got to be the fighter of the year. It's 2 dominating wins, and that connects back to the featherweight division. Ever since even the WEC days, we've had Aldo. He got knocked off by McGregor, who got knocked off, and it keeps continuing. Featherweight's really been on a league of its own since it's been a division, from Holloway, Aldo, McGregor, to now with guys like well, with Ilya and Volkanovski, it really has been, if you have the belt, you really are one of the best talents in the entire UFC. And Ilya's proving that. Max's chin has been a testament to his ability. He's had 30 UFC fights now, never been knocked down, never been knocked out. Ilya did that in 3 rounds. Pretty incredible to watch. Obviously, it was going to happen at some point in time, but Ilya's been the only guy to knock out Max and to knock out Volkanovski at featherweight. Both of those guys ran through the division. Ilya knocked both of them out back to back, which is pretty incredible. In the same year, he's really on a league of its own right now. It would even some people have him as a pound for pound top 3 guy right now, even with guys like Islam Jones and Pereira. So I think Topuria, people they forget that his background is in BJJ. He's a black belt. He knows what he's doing, and I'd even prop that up back to you of asking who his next opponent would be. But he's very capable on the ground. He chooses to strike. He called out Max for the first 10 seconds. He wanted it. He went there. Max thought he was being a matador. He pulled the cape. But Topuria has the confidence. I would never call it cockiness in the UFC. You need that, especially at featherweight. People like McGregor have shown it. So I love what Ilya is setting up, and I'd like a mega fight with him next. So I bring it back to you of who we should fight next. If it's a Volk rematch again, if it's moving up to fight Islam, what's the biggest mega fight next for him?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, we are going to get that Volk fight next. I say unfortunately, because both, like putting this into an example as well. Obviously, I don't think Volk's going to end up as Tony Ferguson, but at this point, if they fight again, I think he's getting knocked out. Like, there's no way. I don't see any way that honestly, almost anyone in the UFC right now could beat Ilya. I mean, he really has everything that you need as a fighter. And like you said as well, too, the cockiness that you bring. I know some people kind of say that maybe he was a little too cocky before when he was going up against Volk. But like you said, I mean, being a fighter, you need to have that as well. If you don't think you're the best in the world, then you can never be the best in the world. This is a guy that knew he was winning the championship against Volk, knew that he was going to beat him before going into that fight, and he sold me. I mean, I had him to knock out Volk because he believed so much in himself that you could just see that I didn't think there was any way that he could lose that fight. The same way that he convinced me that he was somehow going to be able to knock out Max Holloway, even though he never has. But there was something just watching this guy, the confidence that he has, like you said, comparing him to a guy like McGregor. The interesting thing, though, about Ilya is, as we saw from McGregor, obviously he was almost a perfect prospect at one point, but Ilya really is that perfect prospect. He's never lost, whether it's in the UFC or outside of it. As we know, when McGregor came into the UFC, he already did have some losses on his record, which it doesn't really matter too much. Obviously, he went on to become the biggest star in the UFC's history. But Ilya, that zero next to his name as well, really shows that this guy may never be in a fight that he doesn't at least have a chance in. And kind of bring that back around, I do think the Volk fight is next. I do think he's going to beat him. Outside of that, I think the only guy that could really go in there and give him a chance is Diego Lopez. I'm a big fan of him. I think strength-wise, Diego Lopez could go out there. But as we've seen, I don't think Diego Lopez has the gas tank to go those 5 rounds, which I guess technically we're not really sure if Ilya does now because he just finishes his opponents that quickly. But he has looked really good in pretty much every fight he's had. But Lopez does kind of go out there and gas out a little bit early. But I know you did allude to a potential super fight. We've seen it. A lot of people saying this Ilya versus Islam matchup, which we could see in the future, is kind of the final version of Khabib versus McGregor. I've seen a lot of people, maybe have Islam above Khabib all time because of those title defenses right now that he's had. He kind of has everything in the bag as well. And Ilya being that perfect prospect, being that striker. This could be, I think if we brew this up, Ilya goes out there and beats Volkanovski again. Islam continues to win because I don't think there's anyone that beats Islam right now. He'll be going up against Arman next. But if we get that Islam-Ilya fight maybe towards the end of the next year or the year after that, I think that would probably be the biggest fight that we could see the UFC realistically put on outside of Pereira and John Jones.
Yeah, and if you look at Ilya, and his division. At featherweight, the only options are Volk or Diego Lopez. I think Volk is the only question of the same result not happening would be if he's healthier, if that chin has recovered after a year-long layoff, because he went on short notice against Islam and then Topuria. Didn't work, hurt his career. And people are almost forgetting now how dominant he was. He was undefeated, pound for pound UFC #1 for almost everybody. And he kind of ruined all that. So that's the only question I would have if Volk is ready for that Ilya rematch again. But Ilya just looks so good. I really doubt Volk would win that. And Diego Lopez, on the complete flip side, he might have a chance based off pure, just raw energy, just running out there. Ilya, like we saw first 10 seconds with Max, I think he's ready for that. I think that's Diego's only chance because he's not a perfect prospect, but he's so well rounded with his striking, his energy, and his grappling. So that would be a fun matchup, but it seems more like a fun title defense for Topuria. I'd like to see a super fight with Islam next. I think Islam fights Sarukin, most likely wins. Ilya, I guess you can give him Volk. But I'd really like to see him move up to 155. He's a smaller guy, but he says he's going to submit Islam. And if he says something like that, I have no doubt he's going to at least try and do that. So those are his only options, I'd say. And then moving on staying with the Holloway fight, just dissecting it one last time. I mean, that was the first time we've seen Holloway beaten up that badly. Topuria has something special in the way he punches, the power he lands. It's really incredible to see Max like that. It was very sad, but it was more exciting for the future with Ilya and Max against someone like Gaethje, where he just went all 5 rounds and had a powerful knockout like that, and then Ilya made him look like that in 3. So that was very fun to watch. But moving on to pound for pound rankings, where would you put Ilya after that win? Because the top 3 right now is so as dominant as it's been in a very long time now, with Jones being possibly the UFC GOAT, Islam moving up into that conversation, and Pereira coming out of nowhere to dominate the UFC right now.
Yeah, I don't have John Jones in my top. I don't have him actually on my rankings at all right now, since he hasn't fought. And I mean, I love John Jones, but realistically, I can't have him on my rankings if he's not fighting right now. But my top 3, it's really close because I know a lot of people really love Islam. They say he's kind of unbeatable. But at this point, I mean, obviously he went 3 rounds against Poirier, or 5 rounds, sorry, against Poirier. He did finish him, obviously, but it is interesting for me because it depends on what you look for from a champion. Because if you look for that dominance, you could point out Islam. He did go out there and beat Volk twice. But if we're going to have this debate as well about that, the first fight obviously going to decision, if Ilya goes out there and fights Volk again in February and knocks him out, you knock out Volk, Max, and then Volk again. Those 3 wins in a row are the 3 best fight winning streak of all time. I think these past 2 fights, people have been saying that these are the most impressive back-to-back wins ever. And I think there's a pretty big argument for that as well. So I could see, honestly, any debate between Pereira, Ilya, and Islam, between these 3 guys. If you want to talk about dominance as well and going out there and finishing everyone put in front of him, you could talk about Pereira. If you want to talk about dominance from an overall MMA standpoint, Islam has everything that you look for. And then Ilya going out there and just using that pure power in his last 2 fights as well. Right now, if I had to pick the best fighter in the world, it is very tough because, if these 3 guys fought, obviously we know Alex Pereira would win. But if we're talking about skill-wise, I think Islam is the complete package right now. He has everything that you're looking for. But to Ilya's credit as well, like you said, talking about his background, he hasn't really needed to use that grappling as much as you would expect him to this point, which is why I want to see him go against Islam and see if he could stuff some of those takedowns. Maybe if he does go for a takedown himself, if he goes for a submission, I think that would probably be the highest level of MMA we could see right now. But I do realistically think that Islam's probably the most complete guy in all of the UFC right now. But I'll bounce it back to you. Who would you say is your number 1 pound for pound right now?
Yeah, so just like a politician, I'm gonna weave this question real quick, dodge it a little bit. But I value three things with pound for pound rankings, and I feel very strongly about it. One is activity. You have to fight to win. You have to win to be the pound for pound number one guy. So and when I think of that, it's not just in recent months. Someone like Pereira, who fights 3 times a year, wins 3 times a year. I value that a lot. But it's also in terms of dominance. And then the third variable is winning. I think winning trumps everything else. And it's more of looking at the peak of your fighting, where if you like Pereira, he's lost in the UFC before. Guys like Jones, or same thing with Islam, lost like 8 years ago. I don't think that defines you, because I think your peak defines you pound for pound. So right now, I still have Ilya outside the top three. I have him at number four because I'd like to see the next fight. If the next fight is Islam, even if it's Volk, there's a strong case for number one. But the only variable that's holding him down for me is that he has two huge wins, Max and Volk, massive win, the best he could have gotten. But I'd like to see like one or two more that really cements him. And he's so young. He's like 27, one of the youngest champs in the UFC right now, if not the youngest. So I think one or two more huge wins could not only put him in the number one for pound debates, but also you could start thinking about future legacy where he's doing things that no one has done before. And same thing with like John Jones. Activity is the drawback to him. This is 99% sure that's going to be his retirement fight against Stipe coming up. So he's going to be dropped out of there. But I like to see guys like Aspinall or DDP who are on huge runs right now. And I really value that prime in your run where Aspinall, DDP, Ilya, they're peaking right now. They're in their prime. And that's where Ilya comes in. So for me, Ilya, I think I still have Islam at number one. He just is that dominant. His grappling makes his striking look that much better. If you're worried about the takedowns, someone like Dustin in a straight boxing match would dominate Islam. But in MMA, Islam dominated Dustin on the feet. There's no doubt about that. Because when you look at the grappling, the MMA fight as a whole, Islam makes you think. You can't focus on one thing against him. He'll beat you the other way. So Islam is my undebatable number one pound for pound guy right now. But Pereira and Ilya both have a case to climb up there with one or two more fights.
Yeah, a lot of those buzzwords that I heard you use from there kind of reminds me of Joe Rogan's last podcast episode. If you guys haven't watched that yet, weaving around and talking about specifically the primes of these guys as well. Because when we do talk about the best fighters of all time, especially when we're talking about it right now, we're going to talk about Volkanovski. And if he does lose to Ilya, three losses, not in a row, because I believe he did have that Yair Rodriguez fight in between the two Islam fights, if I believe that's true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you look at his career, if you cut it off before then, if you just look at his prime, one of the best of all time. But I do kind of want to bring that back as well. Talking about featherweight, where do you think that Ilya could kind of get to? I think we both could agree he has all the skill to become the best of all time as well, but not right now, specifically after these back-to-back wins against two of the best all time in the division. Where do you have him? And then maybe even, if he goes out and beats Volk again, knocks him out again, where would that vault him into?
Yeah, and when something we both mentioned earlier is the legacy at featherweight, just like the lower divisions like bantamweight or flyweight, it's a lot more recent than people think. UFC as a whole is only 25-ish years old, and these 145, 35, 25 are very, very new divisions. So legacy-wise, it doesn't take much to be the best in the division. Um, so Ilya's he's getting pretty close. Volk was, as you said, on an insane run. I believe it was 12-0 at the time. He was dominating the UFC, and it all went in the snap of the fingers. It all completely disappeared. So I think for Ilya, something I value a lot is staying in your division, the old-fashioned style. You clean your division, you win it out, and then you can get your super fight. We talked about Islam earlier at 155, but what I would like to see from Ilya is you dominate the division. There's only, as we said earlier, there's only one or two more fights left. It's Lopez, Volk. That's all he really has to do. And if you have that Volk win and that Max win, two guys that were never beaten that way by anybody ever in the division, that can be huge for you. And then all you have to do is beat that one mega fight, the Conor Khabib fight, the Volk Islam fight, the fight that really cements your legacy. You have to win that fight. So I really think we should be rewarding guys to stay in their division, make a run up. When you look at guys throughout history, like GSP, personally is like I don't know if I can say he's the GOAT, but I have him as my GOAT. Just because when you look at his dominance and run through his division, he was just so good at every part of the game. He reminds me of that a lot, where you can just dominate every aspect of the game and dominate your division, and that's what cements your legacy. He's going to get a money fight. I'd like to see Ilya fight in Spain, fight at one of the huge soccer stadiums. Like I think he's a Real Madrid fan. Have him fight there in Madrid. It would be humongous. The Spain MMA scene is blowing up because of guys like Ilya. So I think his legacy is he's not far off at all. He just needs to start building up these wins. He's so young, only 27, has a ton of time left. So when you look at the best featherweights ever, whether it's Aldo, Volkanovski, McGregor, or Holloway, he's not far away at all. It's now just time to get these wins instead of just thinking about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think after this Volk fight, he could easily enter his way. If he's not already, I think he does need one more win against Volk, obviously, to enter this top 5 all time up there, obviously, with Holloway, Volk, Aldo, and McGregor as well. But like we kind of started off with as well, weaving it back, Jose Aldo was probably the best featherweight of all time. And then McGregor goes out and beats him. And then we've seen other guys obviously coming through as well. After McGregor left the division, then we saw Max Holloway kind of be that guy. And then going up against Volk, Volk beat him. So featherweight has a very kind of straight path with the overall kind of rankings and everything. And as well, kind of talking about that, a term that's used in boxing a lot as well, which we've seen in the past, especially in the heavyweight division, is kind of that linear champion. And I think right now, Ilia Topuria is that guy. And like you said, 2 more fights, and then maybe he can go and get that super fight, whether that's at the end of next year, if he fights twice next year and gets 2 wins, which it seems like he's going to do. A lot of people were saying that he was pretty inactive, but realistically, if we're looking at UFC champions right now, if you fight twice a year, I think that's pretty good. Obviously, Pereira, everyone's talking about how great it was that he fought 3 times this year. But then people are saying that Ilya was inactive, only fighting twice this year. But either way, if he defends the belt twice against and then goes up and wins that fight against Islam, or at least gives him a good chance, I think that could probably be the biggest fight that realistically the UFC could put on right now. And like you said, if they sell out a massive stadium, I know Dana White says that he doesn't want to ever do an outdoor event because there's so many things that go into that. But I'm sure they could figure something out if there's going to be a lot of money going into this as well, even if it happens to be in Saudi Arabia and they go out and build a massive stadium for this. I mean, this is probably the biggest fight that we could see. And I do want to build it up a little bit more, kind of like you said. Islam can go out there and beat Arman. I think after that, there's so many guys that are stuck at the top at lightweight. I don't need to see him fight Oliveira, Gaethje, or Dustin Poirier again. I think he can fight Arman in January and kind of take some time off. And then if Ilya goes out there and beats Volk again at the start of the year and then beats Lopez, I think we can really build up that fight.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think Ilya has to fight in Spain. Dana has to do it. They just pulled off the Sphere. That was incredible. They can easily do something, whether it's at the Bernabeu in Madrid, a huge stadium. You can get like 100K people to watch. It would be a spectacle. And especially if you have 2 of the top, whether you have them up there at 1 or 2 or 1 or 3 or 2 or 4, however you have the top of the pound for pound rankings, this is a massive fight. It would be the biggest probably since Khabib and Conor. I can't think of a bigger pound for pound matchup. It would be humongous for the sport as a whole, especially internationally. I feel like American fans don't realize how big guys like you mentioned Chimaev or Islam is probably the biggest star in the UFC worldwide. Whereas in the US, people might like Pereira or John Jones more, but it would be a massive fight. And UFC is such a slippery slope with how stupid, to be blunt, most fans are. people have like goldfish memory very fast. They love activity, but they hate you if you lose. Guys like Pereira, they fight 3 times a year, and he happens to win because he's that good. But if you're someone like Volk, you take these short notice fights. People respect you in the moment, just like Danny Gay, and then you're forgotten once you lose. So I think you just got to be smart. I'd like to see champs fight twice a year, even if it's guys like Islam where they have to deal with Ramadan. I think guys like Ilya fighting 2 times a year is definitely doable. He really hasn't taken much damage at all in his last, I would say, his entire UFC career. He could easily do it if he wanted to. So I think it's up to Dana now to be pushing these fights and trying to get them to fight more often. It's been a while for Islam. He's kind of one of those once a year champs. So if his hand is healed, he can fight Arman January, February, sometime in this winter window, and then they can easily set up an Ilya fight in the summer or fall of 2025.
Yeah, and moving on to what's going to be happening this week, especially talking outside of the U.S., we have Fight Night, Moreno versus Albazi in Edmonton. Looking at this card, obviously we just got a very good card, so a little not a letdown for a fight night, but we have seen some pretty good fight nights this year. This one, there is some decent guys on here, but nothing I think we can write home about. We will talk about a little some of these fights. I'll kind of go through some of the ones that I've highlighted so far right now. Obviously, we have a bunch of Canadian guys fighting on this card, but not as many as you would expect. There's 2 Canadians fighting on the main card, and then after that we have a Brazil versus Brazil matchup, another Brazilian, and then a U.S. flyweight bout between 2 U.S. women's fighters, and then we got Moreno versus Albazi, which is Mexico versus Iraq, just in the UFC, not just in general. That would probably be a bit different, but yeah, I mean, this fight isn't a #1 contender fight because it seems like maybe it is. I guess we can talk about it a little bit. Because Royval is still up there at #1. I think we can talk about, I'd assume, I don't think either of us have our official picks yet, but I think both of us, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but I do want to see Kaz Asakura win the championship because I do want to see a bunch of new matchups. And especially in this division, I'm tired of seeing the same guys over and over again. So I would be excited to see guys like Tatsuro Taira, who I kind of wish won that last fight. I know you're a big fan of him. I want to see kind of these guys go against each other. And like we just talked about UFC Spain, you have UFC Japan. There's a lot of good Japanese fighters right now. You get Kai Asakura as the champion. You can go out there and do that. Even a massive fight in Japan between Tatsuro Taira versus Kai would be massive. And Kai Kara France, I'm a big fan of him as well. So, maybe this is a championship contender fight. Maybe it isn't. I guess it depends on if Amir Albazi wins it for Iraq. So let me know. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge flyweight defender. I'll love it till the day I die. I think it's one of the best UFC divisions and obviously most disrespected. There's ranked fighters get cut all the time. It would never happen in a lightweight or divisions or in the middle of the UFC. But it's such an exciting division. Pantoja is one of the most disrespected champions. He's active. He has incredibly bloody and exciting fights that usually go the distance, but not without him being completely gassed by the second or third round. It is very fun to watch. If you don't watch flyweight, you have to get into it. I'm not sure why it's so disrespected, but I wanted nothing more than a Ryzen type Pride FC fight in Japan of Kai Asakura versus Tatsuro Taira. Obviously, Taira lost. Royval is that good. But I think the division, I don't really have a preference. I love Pantoja. I love Asakura over who wins because either way, the division's not in a bad spot. People want that Japanese matchup, but I still Pantoja, if he can defend this belt a few more times, I'd love to see that too. He's very, very good. And even if Asakura loses, that would not be a huge blow as long as he's not embarrassed in his first UFC fight. He's one of the only guys in UFC history to fight in the championship in his UFC debut. So I think he's going to put on a show. As long as he doesn't lose very early on, he will still be one of the best contenders in the division, and he'll get a fight soon after that. But guys like Royval, who have the whole Figgy, Royval, Moreno kind of era of like 2020s with Pantoja, where it was like 4 guys max just fighting again and again and again. people just didn't really care anymore. Dana was going to cut the division. But there's so many young stars in flyweight, like Tyra, like Steve Urseg. There's a ton of talent with Asakura. So I think it's really on just making matchups happen. I'm a believer in that. If people say it's boring, just have championship fights, especially at flyweight. They will be exciting, especially with guys like Pantoja. So when it comes to Albazi and Moreno, we've seen them for a while. Albazi's coming off that neck injury that fused his neck together. So we're going to see if he's healthy again. But if Moreno does happen to win, if Albazi happens to win, Royval is the number one contender. He beat the number one prospect in Tyra. So I don't really have a huge like pick over who I want to win. I will make up my mind on who I think will win. But I think either way, there's a ton of fights to be made in the division. So whether it's Albazi, Moreno, Royval, I think all of them have a chance if it's Pantoja or Asakura who happens to win the belt when they face off at 310.
Yeah. Like you said, I'm sure we'll see kind of a theme about this going forward. I guess you'll be the flyweight defender that we'll see. I'll play the other side as well. I don't think it's as bad as people say that it is. I think it's got better, especially after we've seen those same four guys go against each other. Now we actually have some new guys coming in. And one guy you mentioned, Steve Urseg, who we'll see if he can work his way back up or if he'll just end up as Dominic Reyes 2.0, but hopefully not. He was so close to winning that championship and then going out there and getting absolutely destroyed by Kai Kara France. Another fun, interesting guy in this division as well. The next fight I want to highlight on this as well, which could be probably the best fight of the year between Aaron Blanchfield and Rose Namajunas. This is going to be a banger fight as well. So what are your thoughts about this? I'll let you take this one away, as I know you're a big WMMA fan.
Yeah, I mean, I've done countless hours of research on this fight. Not really. I'm a Namajunas fan representing Milwaukee. I will say that, but I'll move to more exciting notes for the card. But no, I think this will be a fun fight. Namajunas is very talented. She's one of the only people to defeat Zhang Wei Li. I think she's gonna have this little UFC revival coming back in her career. But I'll go over the card as a whole. It's not very strong. There's no people doubting that, but I think I'd like to talk about how the Canadian UFC aspect of it has not been good in 2024. When you look at DWCS, I think Canadians are 0-8 in the UFC. 297 was in Toronto. The Canadians went like 1-7. It is very bad. They're obviously trying to push these Canadian athletes. And I love when the UFC advertises a new country, a new emerging MMA scene. We've had guys like GSP to show up and leave an impact for guys nowadays to compete. But it's time to start winning. The DWCS and the UFC guys have been pretty pathetic in almost all of their fights recently. Mike Malone losing to Neil Magny was pretty pathetic. I'm so mad at him about that. And he's on this card. Marc-Andre Barriault is also not that good, if we're being honest. And they're the two of the highest Canadian prospects right now. So I think Dana should keep pushing not only pay-per-views, but especially fight nights all around the world, not just the continent, but smaller cities, Milwaukee. I love that it's in Edmonton, Vancouver, all over, Boston, Chicago, anywhere, all over the world. And you show off these emerging talents, but I'd like to see it done better. Not saying you have to rig it for the home fighters, but if you have enough talent, you should go there, but don't force it with guys who aren't good enough. And we saw it at 297 where the Canadians got embarrassed. So I think that leads to kind of a weak card, but especially with the Apex, it's kind of slowly dwindling out with the construction to it, I believe. I'd like to see the UFC be more creative in their signings, where almost everyone is a DWDS alumni right now getting signed to the UFC. They can sign guys from all over the world. They've proven it. They've done great scouting. So I'd like more interesting matchups and fight night events from all over the world.
Yeah, and like you said, if we can get this all around the world, I'm sure we'll see some good places that we could go to. Obviously, like we talked about before with Japan, Spain, even places like Israel. Yeah. So also another guy on this card, he may not be Canadian, but if you want to call him Canadian, you could, in Derek Lewis. I'm excited to see him go out here and fight. Maybe he'll go out there and get back on the title run. He's still ranked. He's an underdog in this fight, but I've always committed to taking him by knockout. One of my favorite fighters, a big fan favorite across almost everywhere. But when you're going up against a guy that has 100% finish rate, 100% knockout rate, it's going to be a little tough. But we'll see. This is one of those fights that we're going to have a good prospect come out here and go up against a guy that's kind of up towards the top of the ranks in Derek Lewis. And 8-0 for Joe Nada. I believe that's how you pronounce his first name. I don't know. The UFC heavyweight division right now has not been very good. I think it's probably the worst division, which is kind of sad. I know a lot of people would probably either say that or flyweight, but I think flyweight is a little more interesting because we do have guys at the top of heavyweight, obviously like John Jones right now and Tom Aspinall. But besides that, I mean, we both thought that Tai Tuivasa was going to get cut by the UFC, and he's still ranked, which would not happen in any other division. If you were on a run like Tai Tuivasa right now, you would not be ranked in any other division in the UFC right now. He probably would have been cut. So that kind of just shows the state of the division right now. So not a great card overall. I think we can both agree on that. But, some interesting fights that we'll see in those top 3 fights that we talked about. Is there anything else you want to say about this
Yeah,
card?
yeah. I was gonna add one more thing, but yeah, heavyweight's in a very sad spot. It's pretty embarrassing. There's when you really look at the roster breakdown, they're signing guys on 10 and 10 contracts almost every single week. So there's no excuse for heavyweight to be this bad. They can pick apart from LFA, from other smaller promotions, get a good roster and build up, and the talent will rise to the top. It will happen through winning in the UFC. And the UFC, the heavyweight division is like 30 something fighters. So you have guys like Ty, 5 fight losing skid now, 4 fight, and you're still like one of the best in the division. That's not the way it should be. They need to sign more guys, make it deeper, and have winning means you move up in the ranking. Pretty simple concept. But I'm amazed by Mick Maynard, Hunter Campbell, and Dana White, how every single fight they have a random name generator and find a guy to fight Derek Lewis who has not existed before the fight. I'm not sure how they do it, but Derek Lewis balls is hot, finds the most random people I've never heard of. I'll be honest, every single fight, it's someone I've never heard of before. And he happens to either not try at all and lose, or he gets an insane KO. So I think Derek Lewis is the testament to the heavyweight division right now in the sad spot it's in, even though I love the guy.
Yeah. One more thing too before we talk about our next topic. One thing that kind of talking about international fights as well. This guy came up during the press conference, an undefeated lightweight guy. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but from Tajikistan, and Dana White said that he's going to give him an opportunity, and he's going to be bringing back Dana White looking for a fight. It's going to be in Korea. He's going to go out there, and also they'll have this out as well. I forget exactly. I'm sure they probably put it on YouTube at this point. I think it used to actually be on like TV back in the day, but cable is not really a thing anymore. But he is going to be having this card. The Korean Zombie just started up his own MMA organization, he said, over there in Korea. So that's where this whole thing is going to be going down. Some people wondering if it's a work or not, like Ariel Helwani. But either way, if this guy's as good as he says he is and he wants a chance, I think it could be interesting. And 25 years old, undefeated, it'll be an interesting thing to see when we get to that towards the end of the year. But our last topic today that we're going to talk about is Merab, who talked more this weekend when he was interviewed about fighting cousin Umar next. And he said that Umar is actually scared of him because he took a fight and he started to make the fans boo this guy because he asked him if he was scared of Umar. And he said that he was scared because Umar took a fight. And as we know, Merab has really been pushing for this Sean O'Malley rematch. And it's been interesting. I think it's because he knows that he can win since he won the last one. But a lot of people have been kind of talking about whether you believe it or not. But guys like MMA Guru have gone out there and said that Sean O'Malley may have won that fight. I think it's a lot closer than a lot of people expected watching it because it seemed like Merab was really dominating him in almost every round when we watched it. But when you go back, you can pick out maybe O'Malley won more than one round. You could even, I guess, make the argument that he won 3 rounds. But I guess bringing this back as well, do you think Umar should be next? I personally don't think that him taking a fight means that he's scared. It seems like it's almost the other way around. I think Merab wants to fight a guy that he knows he can beat. Whether he's going to beat him or not, that's completely different. I think we both want Sean O'Malley to win as big Sean O'Malley fans. But either way, I mean, he knows he can beat Sean O'Malley. And it seems like Merab is trying to keep that belt on him for as long as possible.
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying this. I was at Noche. I was at the Sphere. There is no chance Sean won that fight. He looked like he was completely out of his element, completely outclassed. But that being said, he very easily could have won that fight. Looked like he almost wasn't trying. And I do respect him. He was going through an injury. He said no excuses. He wasn't hurt throughout the fight, but he didn't look great. It was a very winnable fight. And so someone like Merab obviously is going to want to fight him again. And I'll be honest, maybe I do like Sean O'Malley enough to say that I would be fine seeing that matchup again. I think Sean O'Malley knows what he did wrong, and he could definitely put up at least a more entertaining fight, even if he loses again. But something plaguing the UFC right now is the control time, the winning factor of it, where I'm not one of those people that hates grappling. If you want to watch kickboxing, there's a whole sport for that. I love MMA. I love the ground game, exciting grapplers. There's guys like Islam who are exceptional on the ground, very exciting. So I don't like that whole talk of grappling's boring or all that. It should be more focused on striking. I completely disagree. That being said, you need exciting striking. I control time is, if you look in the actual rule book, it's not valued nearly as much as you would think. It's really valued for damage. We saw it at 307 with Bautista versus Aldo, which was ridiculous in my opinion, where Bautista was failing takedowns. I think he was 0 for 12 and Aldo was landing more damage, which by the UFC rule books is a winning position for Aldo, even though his back was against defense. I think the judges have seemed pretty terrible recently, and they should probably just look at their own rule books. It's in the rule books. It's not like it really needs to be changed, but it needs to be recognized more. Where Merab wasn't really doing any damage against Sean, kissing him on the neck was getting him aroused. Maybe that's really, and a few knees to the butt, but Sean really wasn't getting hurt at all. Merab got hurt more than Sean, I'd say, in that fight through his very few strikes landed. But I think we need to value that, and then connecting that back through Umar and the bantamweight division. I'd be fine seeing O'Malley fight him again. Obviously, they have Song Yudong potentially fighting him at the fight night in Tampa. It could have been canceled with the injury. I'm not sure the final verdict on that. I think they're trying to find a new date. But Umar is very good. He dominated Sandhagen, who's kind of in that cycle of contenders at the top of bantamweight. And so I'd love to see, or I would say I was at the Sphere when they called out. Joe Rogan was asking Merab, "Do you want to fight Umar next?" Merab completely ducked. He dodged. Thank you. I love Dana White. Like it was pretty. He was very openly dodging it. So I'd be fine if, because Umar really his big one is Sandhagen, and that's it at the top of the division. He's pretty young. I think he can wait a few months. I wouldn't mind that. Song Yadong is a very talented guy, like Sandhagen, who's kind of been through the bantamweight contender kind of fights for a few years now. So I think if he's good enough, he should be able to beat Song Yadong. He's been out wrestled before very recently. And I'm fine seeing Merab versus O'Malley. I think it would be a good fight, contrary to how the last fight went. And then Umar, I think, is the most talented bantamweight right now. I would say that, but he's not. But I think guys like O'Malley, even Piotr Yan or Song Yadong could very easily beat him. So I think bantamweight can move ahead in a very good way if you just have fights happen. Like I was saying earlier, just make fights, book them, have them fight. Results will happen. Crazy things will happen. It's simple as that to me. So I think O'Malley Merab, I'd be fine if they fight pretty soon, fight next. If you want to say Zuck and Umar, that's fine. And then winner fights Umar, and that can start his own title legacy.
Yeah, and kind of one thing that you said as well, the judges haven't been great recently as well. You know, we've seen some official controversy this year with fights ending a little bit early. Dana White's been talking about how terrible the matchmakers are. But if you ask a lot of people, I mean, this year might be one of the best years that we've seen within the UFC in a long time. I mean, 308, which we just saw this weekend, the Sphere event, UFC 300. All three of those cards could easily be the best card in most years in UFC's history, and they all happened this year. So it's been one of the best to be a fan of so far. I know a lot of people have complained about champions as well. I have about a guy like Bilal Muhammad, but who knows? By the end of this year, officially, he could be beaten by Shavkat Rakhmonov, which we can talk about towards an episode later this year as well. But, you know, we still have some good fights as well. We'll be seeing that one. Kai Asakura might make his debut and become a champion. That card itself looks really good. Obviously, we have the MSG card as well, getting to see John Jones go up against Stipe and then some other guys on that card as well. Guys like Bo Nickel getting his first real test so far in the UFC. So despite what seems like everything going wrong with every single aspect, when you actually get inside of the octagon, I feel like we've had some very, very good fights so far, and pretty much every main event has been very good this year. Maybe the Sean O'Malley versus Merab one was a little bit disappointing, not even from the fact that Sean O'Malley lost, but the fight itself wasn't really built up as the fight that we hoped to see within the octagon. Winner or loser, whatever you want to say with that one, but it just wasn't the fight that we expected, but still a very good event before that. And every other fight as well has been great this year as well. Even the Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards fight, we knew that would go to decision, but Bilal absolutely dominating Leon Edwards, dropping him on his head and stuff. It's been a great year so far, and I think we have some other great cards that we can talk about to end this year off as well, with just about 2 months left.
Yeah, and so sort of starting closing out, but it's been an incredible year. This new era of champs and contenders ushered in, and like welterweight, bantamweight, middleweight, all these divisions. There's so many exciting fighters. So I've seen a lot of like anecdotal stories of fight fatigue and people getting burned out with the UFC, blaming Dana White. I think the only problem right now is that control time issue of guys like Bilal or Merab, where they land no damage. Very simple fix, and just fighting. Simple as that. I love watching fights. That's what like it's pretty simple fix. There's been incredible fights every single month. 2 pay-per-views in August. As much as you want to hate Dana White, I think they've done a great job in 2024. It's been a blast to watch. And as long as they keep booking exciting fights with the top guys, it will continue to be fun as these new champs come in through the UFC. And so before we leave out, the last question will be about 309, because that is the next time you'll see from us. So I'd just like to ask you very quick if you have 1 or 2 fights you're excited to watch for 309.
Yeah, I mean, first off, obviously the greatest fighter of all time, John Jones. I mean, both of these guys are going to be walking into a room together. We already know who's going to win this fight and come out on top. I think if Stipe somehow managed to win this fight, this would probably be the biggest like plot twist in UFC history. We would see probably the most insane thing that we've ever seen. Odds wise, I think it's way closer than it should be. I don't even know if like I think Stipe, as we've all heard, you know, the greatest heavyweight of all time, one of the best fighters of all time. Um, but I mean, we're comparing him to John Jones, who just finished Shirogane last year. I don't like the idea of people saying that, you know, he's taking too long to defend his belt. You know, he was injured, he was out. We've never really seen him duck. Obviously, people can talk about the Francis Ngannou thing and stuff like that, but should he have fought Tom Aspinall? I think he should. We'll see what happens after this fight. I think I'm a little more optimistic than some. Like you said, you kind of gave him a 99% chance of retiring. I feel like I'm a little more optimistic. I think there still is a little chance in him that is like, oh, maybe I should go take this challenge as well. And when we're going to talk about fighters' primes all time, you know, we're talking about their prime, maybe not towards the end of their career, because a guy like Anderson Silva, a perfect example. If we talk about his whole career and just look at that wins and losses, he's not the most impressive fighter of all time. But when we look at the peak, you watch the fights, he is one of the best fighters that we've ever seen in the UFC. So even if John Jones takes this fight, at however old he would be when that fight happens, 38, 39 years old. And even if he loses to Tom Aspinall, I don't think it hurts his legacy as much as he would expect it to. It's not like he's in the middle of his prime right now, and I still think he should go out there and give it a shot. Like I said, Bo Nickel, I'm very excited to see him go out there and get this real first test. I think Paul Craig is one of those guys that is right on the edge of being a ranked guy. We've seen him be ranked before, obviously pretty recently as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how he goes up against that matchup. Paul Craig, a little bit more of a wrestler than the past guys that he's fought. So that'll be interesting. And besides that, we're still waiting to see some fights as well. I know we're going to see Rufy on here. He doesn't have a fight yet. He doesn't have an opponent yet. So it'll be interesting to see him come back in here, the fighting nerds taking over as well. Besides that, I do think this card isn't, I wouldn't say it's weak, but compared to the cards that we've seen this year, it's obviously not as great as we would expect. Like the third to last fight of the night being Vivian Araujo versus Corinne Silva. I could not tell you a single thing about either of them. And then Oliveira versus Chandler. I think that's an interesting fight because I think Oliveira is obviously a lot better, but I mean, I have no idea what we're going to see from Michael Chandler. So that's what I'm excited to see because who knows what kind of Michael Chandler we're going to see right now. And hypothetically, if he goes out there and somehow gets the win against Oliveira, that completely shakes up this division as well, because that would put him as the #1 contender after Arman, in my opinion.
Yeah, and this goes just in line with people complaining about the UFC this year. I'm excited for this fight. I mean, John Jones and Stipe, it's kind of reminding me of like when Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers competed for MVP, and both past their prime, both very, very talented still. You're still seeing amazing guys who are still competing head to head, even if they happen to be a little older, and maybe it should have happened 5 years ago. But I can't wait for that. Oliveira Chandler is going to be a banger. For MSG standards, it might not be a peak card, but I think it's one fight away. If they can find one more good fight to throw on that main card, maybe get rid of that woman's fight, like Silva, but I not to point the obvious out, but one more fight could turn this into a banger card. And when you first said the words "the greatest fighter of all time," I assumed you meant Penn State alum Bo Nickel.
Oh,
I think that would be
correct.
a fun fight too, though. Yeah, but Paul Craig's a perfect opponent for him. Bo Nickel's been working hard. He said before he's going to take his time, which I'd love to hear. As long as he stays active, I think that's the right way to do it. Make sure your striking's up to caliber to really compete at middleweight. Paul Craig is the perfect guy who's an experienced vet, a great grappler. So it'll be I'm excited to see if Paul Craig's grappling can cancel out Bo Nickel's wrestling. Um, and so, yeah, that will wrap it up. And then going through expectations for the podcast, the next time you should see us is after 309. We can look back at these takes, reflect on that, hopefully respond to some of you guys about what you thought about it, and then we can dissect how it went and go through the same for that. So you should be seeing from us after every pay-per-view, breaking it down because we're both releasing videos before the pay-per-views with our predictions and leading up to the fights. So it's a good experience for you guys to interact with us and really make this a community and collaborative podcast. So thank you guys for watching, and we will definitely see you guys after 309 next time.
Yeah, and right after that, we'll have one more card after that. And hopefully we can come out here too as well and have our end of the year predictions if we can come on here and make a podcast for that. Obviously, some months we might have 2 pay-per-views depending on if the UFC wants to put them out. And if we see any other big things happening, sometimes we do get those big fight nights where we might have a massive fight. We've seen it in the past where Dana White wants to throw a women's championship fight on a fight night. Just because he couldn't fit it anywhere else, obviously. But with that being said, we will see you guys in a few weeks. So hopefully you guys enjoy, and leave us some comments down below as well if there's any segments or anything you guys want to see. And we'll see you in the next one.